Good evening. This is The Chase. I'm Andy Hodges. Conflict, insecurity, weak institutions and limited access to justice remain a great threat to sustainable development. The number of people fleeing war, persecution and conflict exceeded 70 million in 2018, the highest level recorded by the UN refugee agency UNHCR in almost 70 years. And the births of around 1 in 4 children under age 5 worldwide are never officially recorded, depriving them of a proof of legal identity, crucial for the protection of their rights and for access to justice and social services. With regards to COVID-19, human rights are key in shaping the pandemic response. By respecting human rights in this time of crisis, we will build more effective and inclusive solutions for the emergency of today and the recovery for tomorrow. Human rights put people center stage. Responses that are shaped by and respect human rights result in better outcomes in beating the pandemic, ensuring health care for everyone and preserving human dignity. The UN Secretary General has urged governments to be transparent, responsive and accountable in their COVID-19 response and ensure that all emergency measures are legal, proportionate, necessary and non-discriminatory. The best response is one that responds proportionately to immediate threats while protecting human rights and the rule of law, he said. Our guest tonight will discuss SDG 16 Zimbabwe towards the attainment of peace, justice and strong institutions, here live on The Chase. But first, let's hear a video message from the Secretary General of United Nations, Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
Our world faces a common enemy, COVID-19. The virus does not care about nationality or ethnicity, faction or face. It attacks all relentlessly. Meanwhile, armed conflict rages on around the world. The most vulnerable, women and children, people with disabilities, the marginalized and displaced, pay the highest price. They are also at the highest risk of suffering devastating losses from COVID-19. Let's not forget that in war-ravaged countries, health systems have collapsed. Health professionals, already few in number, have often been targeted. Refugees and others displaced by violent conflict are doubly vulnerable. The fury of the virus illustrates the folly of war. That is why today I am calling for an immediate global ceasefire in all corners of the world. It is time to put armed conflict on lockdown and focus together on the true fight of our lives. To warring parties I say, pull back from hostilities, put aside mistrust and animosity, silence the guns, stop the artillery, end the airstrikes. This is crucial to help create corridors for life-saving aid, to open precious windows for diplomacy, to bring hope to places among the most vulnerable to COVID-19. Let us take inspiration from coalitions and dialogue slowly taking shape among rival parties in some parts to enable joint approaches to COVID-19. But we need much more. End the sickness of war and fight the disease that is ravaging our world. It starts by stopping the fighting everywhere, now. That is what our human family needs, now more than ever.
Welcome back. This is The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program, live from ZTN studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Our discussion this evening, SDG 16 Zimbabwe, towards the attainment of peace, justice and strong institutions. This broadcast is brought to you by ZimPaper's TV network ZTN in partnership with UN Zimbabwe. Now, to our millions of viewers joining online, as usual, throughout Zimbabwe, Africa, Europe, America, the Middle East and Asia, we would like to hear from you. So join this discussion on our Twitter handle at ZTN News and on our Facebook page, ZimPaper's TV network. So make sure we hear your voice. Now, joining us this evening on The Chase to discuss SDG 16 Zimbabwe towards the attainment of peace, justice and strong institutions, we are joined in the studio by Zimbabwe's Minister of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs, Honorable Minister Ziyambi, Ruby Magoshvongwe, she's chairperson of the Zimbabwe Media Commission. And joining us virtually, we welcome Innocent Gonisi, Honorable Innocent Gonisi, Member of Parliament for Mutare Central, MDC Alliance, and chairperson of Zimbabwe's Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Justice, Dr. Iris Siripinda, a Peace and Inclusive Societies expert from Africa University, and Virginia Muwanigwa. She's the CEO of the Zimbabwe Gender Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Chase.
Thank you, Andy.
Now, to all my guests, I do welcome interjections, but please remember here at ZTN, our motto is dignity, dialogue and debate. Minister, let me start with you. Target 16.3 of SDG 16 is to promote the rule of law and ensure equal access to justice. Has Zimbabwe met or is meeting this target?
Thank you very much, Andy. I think as a country, we have always strived to meet that objective. We subscribe to it and we believe that we are going to meet it. And I will specifically focus on the Second Republic. When the Second Republic came into place, we upheld the rule of law, constitutionalism. We opened up the space. You may be aware that in 2018 beginning, even demonstrations, they were very peaceful. We were very happy about the conduct that was happening. We had one of the most peaceful campaigns. We upheld the view that we are different, but we are Zimbabweans. And as we moved towards the elections, a certain section then started advocating that if we don't win, the country cannot be governable, and they coined it Kudira Jecha. I'm sure everyone is familiar with that. We thought it was just political rhetoric. As results were being announced, lo and behold, we had violence that then happened on August 1, and the unfortunate incidents that happened, and our president duly constituted a commission of inquiry, the Mohlante Commission, according to our laws, to investigate that and ensure that we do not have a recurrence of that. And that is testimony to our desire to ensure that we remain a country that abide by the rule of law and is a just nation.
But Minister, if I can refer to the Mohlante Commission report, we're still waiting for feedback on that report, are we not? Is that on the way, or?
I think you are waiting for something that is already being implemented. When the report came out, the president then set up an interministerial committee to look into the recommendations of the Mohlante Commission, to look into the recommendations of observer mission in terms of our elections. And I happened to be the person who was mandated to chair that interministerial committee. And at that time, I was deputized by Comrade S.B. Moyo, who was the then Foreign Affairs, the late S.B. Moyo was the Foreign Affairs Minister. And we have done a lot in that regard. There are several issues that we have looked at, and we took on board several recommendations that we presented to Cabinet to say, let's do this. So it's work in progress, but a lot of the things that they recommended, we have already implemented. I can give you an example. There was a recommendation that we need to repeal POSA, and we duly did that. We now have Maintenance of Peace and Order Act, which went through Parliament, which I'm very happy. We got a lot of positive feedback when we passed that legislation from the generality of Zimbabweans, including the opposition. And I remember when we concluded debate on that particular piece of legislation, Honorable Biti is on record in the Hansard. He applauded government for the openness and the way we debated and included feedback that we got from everyone. And I think that is one of the positive feedbacks, and the implementation of the recommendation, as well as we then looked at the media laws. We repealed IPA. We came up with new laws. We are in the process of finalizing that. So a lot has been happening in that regard in terms of the interministerial task force that I was chairing, and the recommendations and the timelines that we gave ourselves to say, let's look at all this. But by and large, let me continue and say that we are committed to the rule of law, to upholding democracy, and to the values that are enunciated in SDG 16. In that, if you look at our constitution, it is one of the most comprehensive Bill of Rights. and we have mechanisms to ensure that our Bill of Rights is respected, and if citizens feel that their rights are infringed, they've recourse to the courts. And we have done also a lot in terms of aligning our laws to ensure that they speak to SDG 16 and we implement what we are supposed to do. Not only that, when the Second Republic came into place, our state party reports to the United Nations, to the African Charter on Human Rights, were lagging behind. And we are now up to date. We have presented our state party reports to the various human rights organizations. And we accept some of the criticism that they give us, the feedback, and we take corrective action, and we prepare further reports for presentation.
I'd like to bring in Innocent Gonese. He's joining us virtually. Innocent, welcome to The Chase. Your comment, in your opinion, has Zimbabwe managed to attain and promote the rule of law and ensure equal access to justice? Honorable Gonise, I think you have to unmute your microphone.
All right, thank you very much, Andy. I will begin by making a small correction. I am not the chairperson of the Justice Portfolio Committee.
Okay.
I'm just an ordinary member of that committee. But it's correct to say that I'm the MDC Alliance.
Apologies for that error.
I tapped that the Honorable and myself are living in different countries. Because the country which the Honorable Minister described is not the one that I am familiar with. I will start by that. Firstly, to me, there's been no transition. We are in the same situation as we were before November 20.
Honorable Gonise, I think we're having a bit of sound problems. It may be better if you turned off.
I just lost my connection.
Okay.
I just lost my connection, but I'm back.
Okay, please go ahead.
Right. And that to me, there's been no change. There's been no paradigm shift. We are just where we were. I know that there's talk about a second republic, there's talk about a new dispensation, but as far as I'm concerned, the more things appear to change, the more they remain the same. And it is unfortunate that the speeches, the beautiful speeches, which were made in November 2017, have not been matched by the actions on the ground. When you look at upholding the rule of law, I want to say that the rights of the people of Zimbabwe have been trampled upon. And even the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission has actually issued adverse reports relating to various situations pertaining in the country. When you allude to what happened on the 1st of August 2018, it was really unfortunate, but the challenge we have in Zimbabwe is that a lot of the violence is actually carried out by state agencies. Here you are looking at the army, you are looking at elements from the police. You look at January 2019, again, you had a serious suppression of people's rights. Women were raped, and people are still being tortured. You still have a scenario where some of the enforced disappearances have not been resolved. You have the case of Itai Dzamara, for instance. I know it happened before November 2017, but there was an obligation on the police to make periodic reports to the High Court. They have not been doing it, and no progress whatsoever has been made to apprehend the perpetrators of that heinous crime. And I know that one of the reasons why no progress or why there's no movement is because there's a suspicion that elements from the security agencies themselves would be involved. When you look at what has been taking place in the country, you look at application of the law. It is selective. While we appreciate that we have got a COVID pandemic, the law should be applied uniformly and equally to all parties. For instance, at the beginning of this year, we had the DJ in Bari who was arrested on the basis of a media report. Equally, we had an MP, I think it's Kenneth Musani, who was on WhatsApp, on social media, addressing a large gathering in contravention of the COVID regulations. Nothing then happened. When you look at the Moshante Commission itself, I was critical of the way the commission itself was set up, but be that as it may, it actually identified some elements of the army as having exceeded the bounds of what they're supposed to do in terms of the way they operate. But no one has been brought to account, no one has been brought to book. I hear this talk about the interministerial task force. For me, it's just a question of buying time to appear as if things are being done. Right. Yes, reports may be made and so on, but at the end of the day, we still have a situation where constitutionalism is not being adhered to. Right. And for me, the situation is simply that we are having purported reforms when we have got no reformers. And lastly, let me just allude to the MOPA and say that it's really a distinction without a difference. What simply transpired was that the MOPA in its original form was really not different from IPA. So there may have been some cosmetic changes which were done to it at the committee stage. This is what the minister was alluding to. Okay. But when you look at the information, yes, there's the Freedom of Information Act, but at the end of the day, it deals more with access to information. There's still a challenge with the attitudes of the officials. And as long as you have not had a change of attitude, then at the end of the day, these beautiful pieces of legislation like the Constitution are meaningless because the implementation is where the problem lies.
All right, before I bring in Virginia Muanigwa for her question, Minister, I think you probably have a chance to respond very briefly if you can.
Thank you very much. Earlier on, I alluded to the fact that we had demonstrations when the Second Republic came into effect that were very peaceful. And I remember one of the demonstrations that was done by MDC. There was one of our supporters who decided to mingle with the MDC supporters wearing out the party regalia of ZANU-PF, and there was no violence. Towards the election, there was a shift whereby one party decided that if we don't win, there is going to be violence. And initially we thought that was just political rhetoric. And lo and behold, it was not even the police or the army that started attacking people. We then had reports that vehicles had been burnt at ZANU-PF headquarters. I myself was manhandled when I was trying to go to the command center, and all this started happening, and stones were being thrown at ZANU-PF headquarters, and it was consistent with the terrorist message that was being echoed by one of the leaders to say that it's either me or you see Kudirajecha. And then things started happening, and the Motlanthe Commission report, I read it several times. It never apportioned blame on the army, but it directed that there must be full investigations so that the perpetrators who shot people are arrested. But
that's the feedback I'm talking about. Yes. That investigation was supposed to happen, but all these years later, the people haven't heard anything about that.
The investigations up to now were very inconclusive. We've had evidence that there were also people with guns who were on the streets. So it was not only soldiers. So it's very difficult at this particular juncture to say that people who were shot by soldiers or were shot by civilians or whoever who had guns. And the evidence was there, and it was very clear that this is what happened. Okay. But that aside, we are saying as a government, we must applaud His Excellency. He set up a commission to investigate that. He also capacitated the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, because what is also very important is to have early warning signs and try to resolve issues before they get to that stage. So what I was saying is we have done a lot to ensure that we have peace in the country. We have done a lot to ensure that there is access to justice. I do not know also where my learned colleague and honorable member is living. We have separated the Constitutional Court from the Supreme Court. We are in the process of ensuring that we have high courts in all the provinces. We are opening up magistrate courts in several districts. We recently formed another division of the magistrate courts. All this is aimed at ensuring that we have access to justice for the generality of our people. So I am saying, speaking about the SDG, we are doing a lot. And globally, we are satisfying our requirements in terms of state-party reporting. And we present our case to say that this is what we are doing. And in terms of the Human Rights Council at the United Nations, they are actually pleased by the progress that we have made.
I'd like to move on from this and bring in my other guest, Virginia Muanigwa. Virginia, welcome to The Chase. Virginia, excuse me, the Zimbabwe Gender Commission is one of the Chapter 12 independent commissions supporting democracy, whose objectives are set out in Section 233 of the Constitution. Look, there are numerous specific mandates of the Commission, two of which are to monitor issues concerning gender equality and to ensure gender equality as provided for in the Constitution, and further to investigate possible violations of rights relating to gender equality. Now, target 16.7 of SDG 16 is to ensure responsive, inclusive, participatory and representative decision-making at all levels. What role does your Commission play in the attainment of SDG 16, particularly with reference to target 16.7?
Thank you very much, Andy, and it is good to be here. Good evening to Minister Ziambi. Good evening to Chairperson Magosonge. Good evening to Honorable Gonese. And good evening to my sister Iris Shiripinda. It is good to be here. And in terms of your question, Andy, I'm going to respond to it and say that as a country, we've done very well in terms of addressing what I'm going to term the gender conflict. In terms of the legislative framework, meaning that our constitution is very clear that we uphold gender equality and non-discrimination, and we seek gender balance. And in the Bill of Rights that the minister referred to, you actually see prescriptive measures that the Constitution has put in place to ensure that we have inclusive societies. And as the minister has also said, we have set up institutions whose role is to also mediate issues of conflicts, including the gender conflict. I think our main challenge remains that of translating the cultural and behavioral issues among our people, male and female, to ensure that we really have representative and inclusive participation by men and women in decision-making. Statistics from research that has been done mainly by the government of Zimbabwe, but by other stakeholders, show us that we are far from having inclusive decision-making, starting with Parliament, where we find that we've done very well, yes, within Senate, where we've got 48% representation because of the proportional representation method that we used. But when we go to the lower house of Parliament, we find that we are at 31% of representation of women, and this is far from the 50% that is the threshold that the Constitution expects. If we go even into our ministry departments and agents boards, we find that we still have a lot of work to do to ensure that we get to 50-50. So we have done well in terms of the legislative framework. We've done well in terms of setting up institutions, the presence of the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, the Ministry of Women Affairs, Anti-Domestic Violence Council. Those are institutions whose role is to ensure that what is said in our constitution becomes a reality on a day-to-day basis. But the challenge is in translating people's behaviors into what the Constitution has promised the people of Zimbabwe. But as the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, we continue to do the work that we have been mandated to do, conducting research into issues relating to gender and social justice, receiving and considering complaints, carrying out investigations as we see fit, recommending affirmative action programs to achieve gender equality. We haven't had to recommend prosecution yet for criminal violations of rights relating to gender, to secure appropriate redress where rights relating to gender have been violated, and to do everything necessary to promote gender equality. So we continue to do our work, but we really look forward to a time when what the Constitution says is what we live.
I suppose
Thank you.
Thank you. I suppose the issue there, of course, is effective implementation of our good laws and policies. I think that is something that we keep bashing our head against through all of our discussions. Ruby, I'd like to bring you in here. The Zimbabwe Media Commission, being the regulator of the media industry in Zimbabwe, is a constitutional body whose functions include the duty to uphold, promote and develop freedom of the media, to promote and enforce good practices and ethics in the media, and to promote fair competition and diversity in the media. In your opinion, how important is the media and what role does it play specifically in the attainment of SDG 16 targets?
I want to thank you, Andy, first and foremost for this engagement that we are having. It is an indication itself that the media in Zimbabwe is actually playing a very fundamental role in rallying people together, having these kinds of engagements, debates, so that people focus on those sensitive issues, the sensitive points that need to be addressed by every citizen, by our government, by our institutions in the country. I want to take you to section 61 of our constitution, Andy. Freedom of expression and freedom of the media and the inclusivity, that you have made reference to, so that we can have sustainable development. Sustainable meaning that whatever we are doing today should be a legacy to be carried on into the future, taking root, amongst our citizens and communities, without leaving any community or any community or any people, behind. And that speaks to the inclusivity that you made reference to, and also the inclusivity that the media in Zimbabwe is striving to, to attain and achieve. And we have made a mistake, or in certain quarters, people have taken a myopic view that media is equivalent to journalism alone. Media as an industry is broader, and we have seen it transforming itself, mutating into different, forms of expressions. As the Zimbabwe Media Commission, may I take, everyone back to section 61 that I made reference to, and subsection 5, which spells out that freedom of expression and freedom of the media exclude. And that takes us back to what Honorable Minister Ziyambe said about the August 2018 events. Exclude incitement to violence, number 1, advocates of hatred or hate speech, malicious injury to a person's reputation or dignity, or malicious or unwarranted breach of a person's right to privacy. So where, these issues are concerned, we have to observe constitutionalism, we have to observe the boundaries that have been set by law, and it's unfortunate that the blame at times is shifted to the policymakers rather than, taking it as a collective responsibility by all the citizens of this country. And that is partly where our media, actually comes in as a very critical player. How do we influence mindsets? How do we influence attitudes? Through responsible reporting. Responsible reporting in the sense that whatever packaging of our stories, has to be, in whatever form, it has to be factual, it has to be accurate, it has to be fair, it has to be balanced, and it has to be tedious, so that people can actually make timely and tedious, so that people can make informed choices and decisions.
Thank you. Sorry, if you briefly.
Briefly, also, I want to quickly come in, with the issue of COVID-19. Look at how the media has been, propagating information, informing the nation, informing citizens, so that at least everyone is kept informed. But we have a limitation in the sense that the information has been packaged mainly in English, and in a way that has left out a good, proportion of our
I suppose
population.
we could also add, of course, the fake news that's going around, particularly about COVID, about the vaccination and so forth. And I suppose that also is a role of the media to counter that fake news and really tell the facts as they stand and as they are. The truth, if I can call it
the
that.
truth. That is the next point that I was actually going to come in concerning the Zimbabwe media.
Okay, well, I have another question for you on that, so don't worry, keep it. I need to bring in my other guests, but don't worry, you'll have a chance to talk about that.
That's fine.
Dr. Iris Shiripinda, welcome to The Chase. Iris, you are a peace and inclusive societies expert. How important is SDG 16 in attaining these goals, and how far, in your opinion, has Zimbabwe gone in doing this?
Oh, good evening. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. The sound is a bit spotty, but please go ahead.
Okay. I think we look at its best as the MPP.
Iris, sorry to interrupt you, but maybe you should turn off your video. That may be better sound quality. Maybe if you turn off your video, it may give you better sound quality.
Okay.
Okay, try now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, try. Go ahead.
Okay. What I'm saying is that Zimbabwe has tried very much to create a peace and inclusive society in terms of infrastructure. But I think in terms of changing ideology, we still have a long way to go. If we look at women like what Madam Monique already said, can see that we have reached equality between men and we're still really underrepresented. We don't have enough women, especially in powerful positions. If we analyze our institutions, we find that they are mostly male-dominated, especially in the powerful position where decisions made. In terms of peace, I think we don't really have peace, especially pertaining between us, men and women. We've got a lot of cases on gender-based violence. This COVID-19 has actually exacerbated it. Why? Because we don't have a very functional welfare system. You know that when people are really riddled with poverty, violence tends to increase. Sort of people cannot manage on their own.
Sorry, Iris, apologies. Well, we're going to try and sort out your sound. Unfortunately, we can't really hear you in studio, so our technical team will try and sort out your sound. You're watching The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program. Our discussion this evening, SDG 16 Zimbabwe, towards the attainment of peace, justice and strong institutions. This broadcast is brought to you by ZimPaper's TV network ZTN in partnership with UN Zimbabwe. Remember, as usual, we would like to hear from you. So join this discussion on our Twitter handle at ZTN News and on our Facebook page, ZimPaper's TV network. So make sure we hear your voice. Okay, Iris, we've managed to get you back. Maybe you could just briefly finish your thoughts.
Very far from achieving society, especially between the genders. Like what Madam Mwanigwa said, women are still really seriously underrepresented. It's not just a question of equality, but equity. We don't have enough women in positions, in decision-making positions. Women are still there in the lower ranks of the institutions. So that really needs to be addressed. If we talk peace, I think we also still have a lot to do, especially in this time of COVID-19, where we don't have a functional social welfare system. We find that where poverty is an issue, gender-based violence tends to be higher. And now that people have to stay in their homes with not much coming from the government to sustain them, violence is really going on. So I think our government really needs to work on that so that our people can also manage in times where they cannot sustain themselves, so that there are handouts from the government or subsidies so that they can manage in their homes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed. Minister, please, if I can ask my guests, we don't have a lot of time left, unfortunately, and this is such a vital topic, and I do have lots of questions. So if I could ask you to hopefully restrict your answers to the decision points, if you can. Minister, Target 16B is to promote and enforce non-discriminatory laws and policies for sustainable development. How all-inclusive are Zimbabwe's laws, and do they meet these benchmarks? Or in your opinion, does more need to be done?
Thank you very much, Andy. I think our laws meet that benchmark. For a start, if you look at our Bill of Rights, it's very comprehensive. It speaks to equality between men and women, and it is one of the best. And if you look at what we have been trying to do, if I may briefly answer the previous speaker, we are alive to the need to ensure that we empower women. And that was one of the reasons why we had to bring in Amendment number 2 of the Constitution to ensure that we maintain the women's quota for another 2 terms. And not only that, we said we also need to include the youths so that they participate in politics. And we also included the youths. All these amendments, coupled with our comprehensive Bill of Rights, speak to the adequacy of our laws in terms of realizing SDG 16.
Virginia, let me bring you in. In your Commission's opinion, does Zimbabwe have non-discriminatory laws and policies for sustainable development, especially as they relate to gender?
Yes, Zimbabwe has done very well in terms of our laws and policies vis-a-vis gender and women empowerment. As I said earlier, and as the Minister has also just said, our Constitution is very clear. It does uphold gender equality and non-discrimination in its Bill of Rights, Section 56. It also, in respect of the SDG 16 theme around conflict and peace, it also upholds the right to dignity and also the right to personal security and bodily integrity. We also have a criminal code which also seeks to ensure that our men, our women, our boys and girls are safe and feel that they are worthy of being Zimbabweans. Apart from that, we have the Anti-Domestic Violence Act, which also comes into the micro, where most of our relationships start before we go into the public, before we become active in politics, before we become active in business, before we become active in whatever other public matters, we start at the home front. And so the Anti-Domestic Violence Act seeks to ensure that even at that level, we mediate the relations and ensure that no one person feels that they are not fairly treated.
Right.
So we do, as a country, have a very strong legislative framework. We also have strong institutions. We need to match that with the change in our people's behavior across the board, not just among the policymakers, but among the people, the citizens of Zimbabwe, and within the institutions, the people working in the institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Iris, how important is it, in your opinion, to have non-discriminatory laws and policies in place? Do these have an impact on creating and maintaining peace and establishing an inclusive society?
Non-discriminatory laws and policies, when we have them in place, like we have all these beautiful pieces of legislation, are very important because it will make sure that the contributions of the members, the citizens, can lead to sustainable development. But I think, like what Mwanigwa said, the challenge we have is in changing the ideology and the structures in our people. The ideology still is discriminatory to women, to children. So as long as we don't change the ideologies, maybe through our books that we read in schools, the curricula, etc., it will never change. Even if you look at our parliament, women are booed, they are shamed, they are called names in parliament at that high level. So it is this particular ideology that women are less, or that women have no right to speak.
Right.
So when we can effect these laws, we need to effect them. We need to take action against those who violate the laws. And currently, I can't say that we are really doing that.
Okay.
So if we would do that, it can actually bring peace and make it more inclusive, especially for women.
Thank you, Iris. Ruby, numerous studies have shown that the media plays a vital role in the fight against corruption and holding public institutions to account. Critics, however, have stated that the media in Zimbabwe is not free and fair, and in some instances, journalists are, in the critics' opinion, persecuted for doing their job. Your comment?
Thank you so much, Andy. May I start off by, showing our viewers, this magazine that I got from MISA. This is an organization, an NGO, making a report on press freedom, World Press Freedom Day. If we have these kinds of reports and packaged in this manner, are we really saying journalists, reporters, media is repressed in Zimbabwe? The freedom is there, the space is there. The only challenge that we have is that we have a fair, transparent and balanced, reporting and packaging of information, because this refers perhaps to just one incident. And if you were to make a follow-up, only about 5 cases of journalists have had, a close shave, with the laws, and you make it a big, headline, and it would be some kind of unbalanced and unfair reporting. That's number one. Number two, the whole issue to do with the free space. If you were to look at the, the dailies, we had pictures in the Newsday yesterday showing, the demolitions in Glenview. We have the demolitions and the manhandling by the municipal police and the local police. And I think because of the freedom, the space and the freedom that the journalists have, the reporters have, that actually helps to give institutions, to give account, because we now have the evidence in forms of the reports that we have made.
Before I bring in Honourable, you have to be brief, I'm sorry, we have so much to get through.
Okay, so let me also, okay, thank you so much. Let me also bring in the whole issue to do with the Freedom of Information Act. The Zimbabwe Media Commission has already come up with the regulations that will help the public entities and institutions to execute and follow through, that piece of legislation.
All right. Before I bring in Honourable Gonese, Minister, reports, journalists being jailed in Zimbabwe and so forth, allegedly for whatever crimes that they are under. What do you have a comment in terms of freedom of the press in Zimbabwe?
I think the freedom of the press is enshrined in our constitution, like she rightly said, in section 61 of the constitution. And I believe that various reports by our journalists, majority of them, rather some of them false, are washing our newspapers, and nothing has happened to them. But I believe that our journalists also owe it to the public to report truthfully. What we notice these days is that if somebody alleges something, they take it as a fact and report it without that thorough investigative journalism to interrogate what they've been told. They rush to report on issues.
And you're saying that falls foul of some of the
yes,
causes that
precisely,
has brought
that
up.
falls foul to some of the issues that she alluded to. And we are saying, as professionals, journalists must be ethical and be able to report on the truth rather than on falsehoods on the basis of one side of the story without going deeper into the issues. And they must adhere to the dictates of our constitution.
Innocent, to go and say, I know there's a lot to unpack there, and I know, of course, time is limited here on The Chase tonight, but coupled with what I can call media freedom is Target 16-10, which is to ensure public access to information and protect fundamental freedoms in accordance with national legislation and international agreements. Critics again state that in Zimbabwe, public access to information and protection of fundamental rights has not been fully met. Your comment?
Yes, thank you very much, Andy. I will repeat what I said earlier on. The problem that you have is that you have not had a change of the mindset. You have not had a change of attitudes. It's all very well to have an enabling constitution, to have the provisions of Section 61. But the challenge is really when it comes to the implementation. And this is where the devil is in terms of that failure to apply the law as it is stated in the statute books. When you look at the media landscape, you also have got a challenge in the sense that when you look at the electronic media, for example, it's not diverse as should be the case in terms of our constitution. When you look at the issuing of licenses and so on, you have got a serious challenge, and there's some monopoly which one cannot really explain. And at the end of the day, when you look at having access to information, there are a lot of inhibitions which are experienced by citizens. And I believe that this is something we should work towards achieving in terms of the actual realization of the rights. And this is, I think, an area where we need to do a lot of work as a country.
Thank you. Minister, I'm going to be blunt with you now. Numerous reports and critics have cast aspersions on what they call Zimbabwe's poor human rights record and rule of law. Can you clear the air? Does Zimbabwe have, in your opinion, a poor human rights record? And why do you believe that critics, especially the international community, say these things?
I totally disagree. I believe that our human rights record is not very bad. We, like I said earlier on, we are almost up to date with our state party reports to various international organizations, the Human Rights Council of the UN, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. We have our Chapter 12 institutions which are there to support democracy. All of them are now functional.
So why do they say these things?
It's a perception. You know, we are a country that is under siege, and to sell their story, they then allege things that are not there. But I believe that anyone who visits Zimbabwe, including the diplomats that are accredited to Zimbabwe, I'm sure you've met some of them, they will tell you that this is a beautiful country. I don't want to go back. Why would they want to stay in a country that has a very poor record of human rights violations? In Harare, you can literally drive or walk at 1 a.m. Nobody is going to mug you. In other cities, you are warned when you get there. So I believe that Zimbabwe is a peaceful country, but there are those that want to cast aspersions like what you have said. But I have presented our state party reports to the Human Rights Council at the UN. I went to African Union to present our African Charter on Human and People's Rights report, and we were commended for the work that we are doing. So I'm not sure where those reports come from.
Okay. Innocent, let me come to you. Your comments. In your opinion, does Zimbabwe suffer from poor human rights and rule of law?
Yes, our human rights record is actually atrocious. Contrary to what the Honorable Minister is trying to portray, the situation is actually very dire. You've got a scenario where these violations take place on a selective basis. The fact that one can walk in the street does not mean that other people are not victimized. It does not mean that human rights defenders are being arrested. When you only look at our courts, you have a situation where a lot of the persons who are actually arrested, they are denied bail on flimsy grounds. And you also have a situation where justice delayed is justice denied. You have the case of last Maenga Hama in Tungamira Mazukiri, for example, who were incarcerated for a period of like 8 years. And their case was heard more than a year ago, only for the judgment to be delivered a few weeks ago. So all those are issues which relate to our poor record in terms of the actual implementation. When you look at our institutions, it's not just about having courts or having about the Chapter 12 institutions. The question really is about effectiveness of those institutions. And I believe that the judiciary has been one big letdown. When you look at the Constitutional Court, you don't actually have a progressive jurisprudence emanating from that apex court. What you have been having instead is a situation where they use the doctrine of avoidance, use technicalities so that they don't go into merits of most of the cases that come up before them.
Thank you. You're watching The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program. Our discussion this evening, SDG 16 Zimbabwe, towards the attainment of peace, justice and strong institutions. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimbabwe's TV network ZTN in partnership with UN Zimbabwe. Minister, I suppose you can comment on one thing that I picked up from Innocent there. He said judiciary is one big letdown. You can comment on that. But furthermore, on top of that, SDG 16 has a target 16.4, is that by 2030, nations must significantly reduce illicit financial and arms flows, strengthen the recovery and return of stolen assets, and combat all forms of organized crime. Now, we've seen an upsurge in violent crime in Zimbabwe. Smuggling of goods and minerals is rampant over our porous borders. Reports indicate that illicit financial flows in all sectors are continuing to happen, especially in mining and minerals, and criminals appear to be getting away scot-free with their proceeds, the criminal proceeds. So, second question on top of your comment on the judiciary that Innocent brought up, what is Zimbabwe doing to ensure that target 16.4 is met? Are more stricter laws required or planned to meet this target?
Thank you very much. Maybe I can start off by what Gonese has said in terms of the judiciary. I mentioned that we need to reform the judiciary, and there was an outcry. Gonese is saying the same. I believe that reforming the judiciary is a continuous process. And where you identify gaps and the need to ensure that we reform, you proceed to do it. It has nothing to do with the independence of the judiciary. That's why you saw we decided that let's separate the Constitutional Court from the Supreme Court. Let's have other judges being appointed. We need to strengthen the institutions so that they can dispense justice accordingly. And I agree with him. It's a travesty of justice to have somebody spend 8 years when they eventually are said to be not guilty. There's need to look at the judiciary and say, what is it that we need to do to ensure that it functions effectively? And then coming to your second question, we are doing our best. You have to also to acknowledge that we are a country that has been ravaged by sanctions for over 20 years. And the effect of that is our institutions are also weakened by virtue of sanctions. And that will result in what you are calling that illicit flows, manifestation of criminality happening. But we are now telling ourselves that we need to strengthen our institutions. We're in the process of strengthening the police to ensure that they are adequately equipped to effect border controls. We're in the process on our own of equipping the army to ensure that they also assist the police. Recently, the Minister of Finance availed funding to ensure that the police also have vehicles. So we acknowledge all that, but we have told ourselves that we are on our own. We have to do things on our own to ensure that the security of our country is guaranteed. The peace and stability of the country is guaranteed. And we have set up an anti-corruption commission to ensure that they also investigate those issues. And we now have special anti-corruption courts. And we are saying that we need to strengthen those institutions that will ensure that everything that you said is curtailed and we have a peaceful country.
Virginia, target 16.1, which has significantly reduced all forms of violence and related death rates everywhere, and 16.2, end abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence and torture of children, are critical targets and goals that any country, including Zimbabwe, must strive to attain sooner rather than later. But Virginia, you mentioned earlier about the huge increase, the significant increase in gender-based violence. We've seen reports of ritual killings, child abuse cases seem to be going up. Your comment to this? And further, is your commission advocating or recommending stricter laws and enforcement of such practices?
Definitely, our commission is recommending that we either strengthen existing laws or we come up with laws that will address those gaps that we see. And there is indeed a spike in cases of gender-based violence, although there's also another school of thought that says it may be that it's not so much a spike, but it's more reporting because of the awareness raising that has been done. But we've definitely also got a lot of criminal violence or violence against children, a lot of them culminating in gruesome murders. And so, again, we want to go back to the issue that we need to be having more equality. We need to be having more diversity in our institutions. We want to have men and women in our institutions so that from having that diversity, we are able to also get different ways of managing issues, because there are some issues that somebody may actually think they're not very important because you are a man, or somebody may think they're not very important because you are a woman. So it's important that in any institution, we have both men and women there, so that as we harness this diversity, we'll find that there's more increase in diverse voices, diverse choices, and also diverse participation in decisions that have to do with people's lives. So we really need to be able to come together as the citizens of Zimbabwe with our policymakers, with different other institutions that work to complement government, to ensure that we create a country where there's personal security and there's bodily integrity, and nobody believes that just because you are one gender or just because you are a man or a woman, you can get away with violating somebody else. So we have a national protocol of multi-sectoral management of sexual abuse and violence, and this is meant to ensure that it addresses all the multifaceted nature of violence. And we look forward to ensuring that these institutions really stop the violence, or at least significantly reduce the violence that is there. But what is more important is also for people at an individual level to speak out when you are a witness to violence or you are a target to violence. Because as long as we also don't report, then it may be that we are talking about an issue as if it's a small one when it is a very big one.
I have to jump in there. Yeah, so unfortunately, I have to jump in there because we are running out of time, and I do want each of you to have a final...
No, that is fine. I'm done.
Thank you, ma'am. I want you all to have a final comment. Minister, I'm going to talk about two targets. SDG 16, by 2030, provide legal identity for all, including birth certificates, and also strengthen relevant national institutions, including through international cooperation, building capacity at all levels, and particularly developing countries to prevent violence and combat terrorism and crime. That's also target 16A. I want you briefly to comment on those two. Is Zimbabwe achieving the SDG 16, particularly on the legal identity? Millions of our citizens don't have that documentation. That's a big problem in terms of their social rights. And also, how successful is Zimbabwe's re-engagement with the international community?
Thank you very much. In terms of identity, the Minister of Home Affairs, I think he has done extremely well, guided, of course, by His Excellency. We now have a package that we're going to use. We are going to have a PPP where we engage other partners to ensure that we produce passport. They will also extend it to identity cards. We want to ensure that everyone else who doesn't have an identity card will have them. In terms of our re-engagement, I think the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is the lead ministry, has done extremely well. But our re-engagement is anchored on the removal of sanctions. For as long as the sanctions are there, we believe that the engagement process will not bear fruit.
Okay.
And what we are doing, we're engaging the EU. We are engaging within SADC to ensure that we push our re-engagement agenda.
Fine. Iris, I have to ask you a final question because we are coming to the end of the chase this evening. Briefly, what more needs to be done, in your opinion, by Zimbabwe to achieve a peaceful and inclusive society? And I will ask you to be brief, please.
I think we also need to check the discourse that is used on Zimbabwe in general. We will talk about being no peace, being this very much as if we don't recognize any achievements that are being made. I think that can be very discouraging. So I think we need to give credit where achievements are being done. So that's one thing.
Okay.
What needs to be done by the government, like I said, we have got beautiful pieces of legislation in place, but we need to make sure that they are implemented. We are a developing country, and like that, what the minister said, we are not that bad if you compare Zimbabwe with other many countries, you know, especially in the developing world. So we need to make sure that we put resources where it is needed, especially in making sure that we include that the society becomes more peaceful and inclusive. We need to work with the international bodies also, so that we are helped to make sure that we achieve what we want. We achieve inclusivity and peace.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, I have to jump in there. Innocent, the same question to you. SDG 16 by 2030, very briefly, what more needs to be done so that we can create peace, justice, and strong institutions?
I think what is very critical is to implement. Actions speak louder than words. And I think that the challenge that we've had as a country will say all the beautiful things, but do the exact opposite. And when you look at 2030, I think we are still very far from achieving that particular target. And when you look at our institutions, they are strongly compromised. I earlier on alluded to the issue of attitudes. We actually need the persons of integrity to be in some of those institutions.
Okay.
And I believe if we don't address that, we are going nowhere.
Ruby, what would be your message to the media? What should be their role? Are they doing it effectively? And what, in your opinion, should or can they be doing better? And I do have to ask you to be brief, please.
Oh, thank you so much, Andy. Our media, as the Zimbabwe Media Commission, we're encouraging our media practitioners, media as an industry, to be all-inclusive in terms of using the 16 official languages in this country as prescribed in the Constitution and the other languages as well, so that no demography, no community is left behind. We're encouraging entrepreneurs in Zimbabwe to invest media services in local languages so that people are not left behind. We are also engaging ZEC. Elections are coming so that their adverts are also placed in local languages in the small publishers, publications.
But it's still back to what you said: fair, balanced, truthful reporting. This is what you're encouraging in the media.
That's what we're encouraging in the media, but without leaving those who have been marginalized previously. We are not focusing just on the urban, communities.
Or in English, we need it to be in all our
we need to be in all our local languages.
Thank you, Ruby. Unfortunately, I know there's so much to talk about at SG 16, and I know there's so much you'd like to say. Unfortunately, we are coming to the end of the show, so I'd like to leave the final word to you, Minister. Can Zimbabwe achieve SDG 16 by 2030? Do you think we can? Do you think more needs to be done? And I have to ask you to brief to close up.
I think we can, and we are on course, and we have the determination to realize that goal. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. I think on that note, yes, Zimbabwe can achieve SDG 16 by 2030. I'll bring you back in 2030 to ask you the same question, Minister. We have come to the end of our show this evening. You've been watching The Chase, Zimbabwe's premier current affairs program. Our discussion this evening, SDG 16 Zimbabwe, towards the attainment of peace, justice and strong institutions. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network ZTN in partnership with UN Zimbabwe. I'd like to thank my guest this evening, Zimbabwe's Minister of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs, Honorable Ziambi, Innocent Gonese, MDC Alliance Member of Parliament from Mutare Central and Member of Zimbabwe's Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Justice, Virginia Muanigwa, the CEO of the Zimbabwe Gender Commission, Ruby Magoshongwe, Chairperson of Zimbabwe Media Commission, and Dr. Iris Shiripinda, a peace and inclusive societies expert from Africa University. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for appearing on The Chase this evening.
Thank you, Andy.
Well, that's our show for tonight. I'm Andy Hodges. Good night, and as usual, you all be safe.